today we've had worshiping already. I was curious where we're going to go from that Arkansas joke, but it got better after that. So I'm a little worried if they win again, what we're going to see from Tim on there. So he's a little energetic today, leading us. I want you to know, if you're not aware, this is Tim's 4th year anniversary with us. I don't think he wanted me to bring it up. We had a gift for him, but I ate it. I'm just kidding. We'll buy you another one. I think that they're planning on something special next week on there, but it kind of day got away from us. But it's been a pleasure serving with you, and but I wanted to make sure you knew that. And then I think the deacons, Norman, and the personnel committee, and different things have something for you next week. But we didn't want to go without making a mention of thank you for all the work that you do, your attitude, for most of the songs you pick, for how you lead us. No, it really has been one of the treats of coming and helping you during this time is the friendship that we built. And I look forward to that continuing. Well, I'll interrupt myself one more time. It's been an interesting weekend, hasn't it? As you watch the videos, and we're reminded it's been hard to believe it's been 20 years. I think the thing that hit me the most, that made my hair stand up on end, was when I saw former President Bush in the second grade classroom when they came and told him the news, and the look on his face, it brought back every one of those memories on there. And so we recognize what happened and continue to pray for our country. It's been 20 years, but so many lives have been so radically impacted. And sometimes we can kind of forget, and I know many people are trying to forget things going on, but we need to recognize that our country is still hurting from that, and we need to be in prayer for our nation on there. So I won't say anything more on there, but I know it's been a tough weekend for many people as we remember that, and we're flooded with all the memories of what we were doing 20 years ago, and then the lives that were taken and lives that were changed and never the same again. Well, last Sunday we started a series in the book of James, and I told you a little bit about that. Is that I won't give. There's someone mentioned to me the other day, actually last Saturday, that common sense, I'm trying to think if I remember it, common sense has become so uncommon that it needs to be called uncommon sense. Is that how it's, I'm trying to see where who's oh, there you are. Yeah. Did I say it right? I didn't get it right?
Common sense is so uncommon today, it should be considered a superpower.
Oh, superpower. Okay. Wait, that too. I don't even have a Superman underwear on. So, okay. With that, I shouldn't have said that. My wife will get after me. She watches these, you know. Okay, but and the reason we were started into a study of the book of James, and I looked at what we need to go through, and I like to go through books of the Bible in sections. We'll do different topics at different times, but I find if we go through a book of the Bible or a section, it all connects. And James just doesn't write one thought here. He writes an entire epistle to these church where everything connects in, and if we don't follow through a whole book, sometimes we miss how all the teaching connects into our lives. And James is an important book that I think we need to have more than any in our day and age where it seems like common sense has gone out the window. And we're not looking at common sense, we're looking at biblical sense here, but James is probably the most practical book in our New Testament. It is regarded as wisdom literature. It's our only wisdom book. Now, there's wisdom all through our Bible, but our New Testament, there's a category in our Old Testament, New Testament called wisdom literature. In our Old Testament, it's going to be Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs is going to be, but you're going to look at, especially Proverbs and Ecclesiastes will be, and Job will be our wisdom literature. For our New Testament, the book of James is considered wisdom literature. And so similar to Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, But I guess when you look at it, it's a kind of a technical term, but I'd say I'd boil down to how we put it today. The book of James' wisdom literature, what it does is it forces us to take our theology, or what we say we believe, and put it into practice. And I guess that's going to be common. It's going to be for our Bible. It's going to be common sense, because we can have a lot of stuff in our heads, can't we? We can say we believe a lot of stuff, but what happens when we actually get out there and practice? And for, I'm an Old Testament professor, so I have to bring a little bit about this up, but in the Old Testament, it didn't matter how much intelligence you had. It didn't matter how much, if you had 20 PhDs and all kinds of stuff in education. A wise person was the one that took the things of God and put it into practice. You'd have all the degrees and all the training and all the education in the world, but if you didn't know how to put it into practice, you were a fool in the Old Testament. And so in our New Testament, as James comes, says you can have all these beliefs. We can say we believe all these things. We can know all these things. We can have all these things in our head. But until they get down into our heart and we see them living out in common everyday life, said you've not practiced the teachings of the Bible. Says you've acted in a foolish way. And so with James, he starts chapter 1 dealing with practical issues. And that's why I enjoy James so much, because I don't know about you, but I have to live in the real world. Most of you do too, don't we? We go out into this world and we have our jobs, we have family, we have issues, and life hits us every single way. We're in the schools, everywhere you're around, everything we're dealing with life, it just seems to hit us. And I enjoy hearing people debate some, I don't know if I mean enjoy it. It's a big theological issue, but for me, the big theological issues, while they're important, I want to know how to get through this week. I want to know how I get out Monday and I go through and I walk through where my employment and what I'm doing with people and the life things that are hitting me and the questions I have. I want to know how to get through this week so that I can come back next week and fellowship with you. And so James realizes these people are out there, they're dealing with the real world, and he lays out this foundation. Here's what God says. Here's what you say. Now let's put it together and we practice it. And so in chapter 1, the first thing he deals with is how do you deal with trials? And we looked at that last week. When things fall upon you, we know that things hit us from all different directions. He says, how do you deal with those things? Then he moves in this chapter to how you deal with temptation. None of us ever deal with temptation, do we? So he says, you're going to go in this world and things are going to hit you left and right, from finances to health issues, all kinds of stuff. How do you deal with that? He starts with that, but he says, well, you're going to be tempted as you go through this week. So he hits this whole thing of how does a Christian deal with temptation? And later in this chapter, then he's going to say, now what role does the Word of God play in your temptations and in your trials? So today, we're going to look at how a common problem of how we deal with temptation as Christians. Let's be honest. In our country, Americans don't do very well with temptation, do we? If we're really honest about it, how well do we do with temptation in our country? Inside and outside of the church. I read a study not too long ago that showed all these different issues that the world's dealing with, and then how a Christian deals with them the same way, and there was no noticeable difference between the two. From all kinds of messes and thinking and marriage and adulteries to stealing to all kinds of stuff, all this stuff, and it showed all this thing. How does someone who doesn't know the Lord, and how does someone who knows the Lord? And if you took that away, you wouldn't know which group was which. And so James is pretty blunt, but he's not blunt in a bad way. He's in an encouraging way, but we don't do well with temptation. And it seems that our country's kind of got some haywire thinking on that. You just kind of sum it up where it's okay to do whatever you want as long as you don't get caught. Isn't it? And you look at what happened in our country with looting stuff that's going on. And then people just kind of looked another way. They're tempted. They didn't just decide, oh, the store's open, I'm going to go in there. They were tempted and they stole. And yet how many people just kind of ignored that? I'm in education. It used to be that plagiarism and cheating was wrong. I still think it is, but it's just a common thing on there. And I started thinking a lot of stuff. Office supplies at work, guess what? Those are owned by the company. We don't take those home, do we? And I think I could go through and hit a whole bunch of different things, and you look at how do we deal with temptation? We get every opportunity, but it seems this understanding, as long as we don't get caught, it's okay. And we're really good at blaming other people when we get caught in temptations. And sometimes we're good at blaming God when we face struggles. And so James wants to deal with that. He says, you're going to deal with trials. You're going to be tempted every single which way possible. And our human nature is to blame others, to blame God, to look all around, to excuse it. And James says, no, let me give you some wisdom on that. Let me show you how a Christian needs to respond in light of temptation. So if you'll read with me, starting in James chapter 1, verse 12, and we'll read through the end of this chapter. It says, blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life which God has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he's lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creation. Now, the first thing that steps out in here when you look at this passage is James moves from various trials in the beginning into temptations. And he's going to look, he says, in the middle of trials, you're going to be tempted. So you may not have any response, you may not have any control over the trials that come in around you. You may walk in Monday morning and there may be a hostile takeover of your company and your job just disappeared. You have no control over that. You may have gone to the doctor and also got a diagnosis. You have no control over that. Or something may have happened in your life and you say, I have no control over that. But we do have control of how we respond in the middle of those trials. I can't change what comes from me from the outside, but James says, in the middle of that, you're going to be tempted. And you'll have control over that. And that's the thing that James picks up in here. Says, we will face trials. But you realize in the trials, you're tempted as well. It doesn't just happen. There's not a separation of trial over here and then a temptation. He says, in the middle of those trials, you're going to be tempted. You're going to be tempted to walk away from God. You're going to be tempted to blame God. You're going to be tempted to question God. You're going to be tempted to look at other people. He says, when trials hit, he's helped us says, how do you walk with those trials? You put this faith and trust in God. But in the middle of those trials, James recognized often we're tempted in multiple ways when the trials hit. You may be hit with a health issue, unexpected loss of a job, and that's the trial you're facing, but you may be tempted to wonder if you can trust God or not. So you have the trial that will hit us, and we have no control over those things. Those fall on us, but how do we respond in the middle of it? That's where we get the temptation. Do you make a choice to rest in God's peace, seek after God, or to get consumed with worry and fear? I've shared with you some of the stuff that we've gone through, but when you hit the trial, you're going to be tempted. I'll give you an example from my own life. I'm in a ministry, have a family, 3 young kids. I'm in a foreign country. My wife can't work because she's not a citizen. And it's in November, and all of a sudden there's a hostile takeover of the board of the organization I work for, and I get a notice on Friday, by the way, your job's gone. No severance. Not even a word. They didn't even send a note to me. They told someone else, tell Norm his job's gone. Along with everybody else that I was responsible for in a foreign country. Christmas was coming up. It was the end of November. I think it was November 31st when I found that out. No, November 30th. There was no 31st in that. See, my wife was here. She had corrected me already. What do? I can't change the fact that in another country there was a board meeting and a hostile takeover and all of a sudden all of our jobs are gone. I can't change that. That's something from the outside. Well, what temptations came into my heart? I am a father providing for a wife and 3 kids in the middle of a foreign country, and I just lost my income without a severance. You think there was any temptation to struggle? I can't change the circumstances. That fell upon me, but how do I respond in the middle of it? I'm thinking, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to take care of my kids? We've got Christmas coming up. What about my plans? What am I supposed to do? You catch what James is saying? Trials are going to hit you, but in the middle of the trials, you're going to be tempted. He says you've got to be careful in those temptations. I have a temptation to wonder, God, why did you bring me to this country to leave us hanging like this? You think there was any temptation for fear to think, how am I going to provide for my family? What's next for my future? What bills are coming up first that I need to take care of that all of a sudden, as you see, how do I get out of this country? Do you kind of see what goes on? I can have a temptation to worry, to be afraid, to be gripped by fear, to have my insides turned upside down, can't I? And so he says, you will have trials that fall upon you, but in the middle of that, he says, you're going to realize that in the middle of those trials, you will be tempted and tempted and tempted in ways that could lead you down a wrong road. There are times we can endure a trial in difficult circumstances. They seem like we do well on the outside, but on the inside we can turn into a mess. So you could have come up and asked me, said, well, how you doing, Norm, with all that? And I could have said, I'm doing great. Isn't it great? I just lost my job. Isn't it fun? They didn't give me severance. I'm in a different country. I could look at you with a straight face and say, well, it's going to be okay, but often we can say that, but what's going on our insides? There's turmoil, isn't it? He says, so sometimes we can hit the trial, and we can, on the outside, pretend like we're doing well, but what's going on often in the insides, and that's where James cares about. You can endure hardship, get through, make the adjustments, and you can even walk through it, and you can walk through the trial, and you can make it all the way through the other end, and you see how things work out well. But in the inside, not only did it let it turn, but you resentment. Why did God let me go through that? Why did my family have to endure that? Sometimes we can walk through the trial, and someone, you may look at me and say, well, Blackaby walked through that trial real well, but you don't know that I may be harboring anger in my heart. Why in the world did God allow that to happen in my life? We were trying to honor him. We were trying to do what's right. And so when James says you can go and you can hit the trial, you may be able to walk through the trial so no one else will know it. How many of us have gone through a trial, we gritted our teeth and endured it? Some of us get through a trial based on our own stubbornness, don't we? No matter what, we're going to get through this trial. And we're stubborn enough. We're going to get through. We're going to put up a good front. After all, that's what we're supposed to do. We're going to walk through this. We're not going to let anybody know, but we may have walked through it, gritted our teeth, but we did it in our own strength. What happened to our relationship with God? It can harden, can't it? It's not a matter of getting through the trial. A person who doesn't know Jesus Christ can get through trials. They do all the time, don't they? But James says for the Christian, says you're going to have trials hit you from every different direction, but you're going to be tempted in the middle of that to walk away from your God. He says at those times you need to be careful. We not only need to endure the trial, but also the temptation that would come with the trial. James teaches us that a person that endures, he says, blessed is a person who remains steadfast under the trial, for when he has stood the test, he receives the crown of life, which God has promised to those who loves him. Some of your translations say that this person is blessed. He's blessed. So blessed is the person who remains. Now, I will tell you that with walking through that trial, when our jobs were gone, we had no say in it, and all of a sudden myself and several others lost our jobs. We're trying to figure out how to make it. We are in another country. They took everything away, every resource, everything, just left us there. It was a trial. And we were tempted. But I can tell you that within a month, God provided everything we needed, and we kept going. And if you'd have seen on the outside, you wouldn't even know we missed a heartbeat. But he says, the one who endures that trial is blessed. I can tell you, I did not feel blessed. I felt worn out. We built new websites, we built new companies, we were in 2 different countries, we had to make sure everybody got their stuff, we made sure that there was salaries that were placed, we had to buy products, we had to do all this stuff, everything that we had to do in a month to make sure that no one missed a paycheck. You know what? Not a single person missed a paycheck. Not a single order wasn't fulfilled, not anything that wasn't taken care of. But I can tell you, I didn't feel blessed in the middle of it. I felt tired. but I also knew that God took care of every single bit of it. And when he uses the word blessed here, sometimes we translate it as happy. I think it's you're blessed as a person who walks through that, honoring God in the middle of that, because in the end you realize God walked me through it. I may be tired, I may be worn out, but I'm blessed because I recognize God took care of everything. It wasn't that I was happy. In my heart, you could maybe describe later, I'm happy now how I walked through it. But he says, blessed is the person who makes it through those trials, the one that doesn't get caught up in the temptation, that honors God, because in the end, when you walk through that, you realize God took care of me. I don't expect if you're going through a health issue, you're going to be happy, I feel blessed, I'm walking through that. You'll feel as if God walks you through the middle of that, you'll recognize the peace of God that surpasses all understanding. You'll walk through the wisdom of God that he gives generously to anybody who asks. You'll know that he walked with you and took care of you and provided. But happy may not be the word at the time, is it? Relieved? Thankful? Grateful? Blessed that you walk with God. You'll receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. The peace that God took care of you. Well, he moves from this and he says, let no one say when he's tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot tempt with evil, nor is he himself tempts anyone, no one. But each person is tempted when he's lured and enticed by his own desires. And desire, when it's conceived, gives birth to sin. And when sin is fully grown, it brings forth death. And why in the world would James bring this up? Because God was inspiring him, realizing, looking at the people, we have a tendency to blame God when things go difficult, don't we? You don't have to give a testimony about it, but we know we do it, don't we? That's why James brings it up. He doesn't bring it up because he's talking about some pie-in-the-sky theology. He's saying, I know what Christians are like. He's one of them. He's walking with them. They're in a difficult time. We have a tendency to wonder and question God when things go difficult, don't we? And he says, in the middle of that, he says, let me help you with that. He says, don't blame God in the midst of your struggles. When we look at the scriptures, clear that God never tempts us. He says he doesn't tempt us. There certainly is testing. There's certainly times where he puts you in growing spots, but he never tempts you to ever walk away from him. That would go completely against his nature. He created you. He loves you. He sent his son down the cross for you. He wants you to walk with him. And the scriptures bear witness, God will never tempt you to walk away from him. God will test you so you can see what your faith is like, but it's never for the purpose of walking away from him. In the middle of that temptation, he says, don't ever blame God. God can't tempt you. He'll grow you, he'll walk with you, he'll encourage you, but God will never put things in place in front of you to help you walk away from him. That would go against his nature of love. But sometimes we struggle in the middle of that. Financial difficulties can tempt us. We can question God's involvement in our lives. Does God even care? Have you ever asked that? Does God even care? Things are falling apart. I'm not sure how they're going to hold together. These trials are coming out. Does God care? Imagine if I was to ask you to raise your hand, a lot of us would have said, at some point in our life, we've asked, does God really know what's going on or care about me personally? That thought comes into our mind, doesn't it? Why is he not providing? He said he would take care of me, but things don't seem to be adding up. Why is he not providing? The death of a loved one, we can question God's love for us. The suffering of the innocent or the righteous tempts us to question God's judgment. Have you ever wondered, it seems like the innocent and the righteous seem to have so many difficult things going on, and yet the wicked and the ones that seem to despise God and prosper so well? That's an age-old question running all the way through our Old and our New Testament. People have asked that for generation after generation after generation. Why does God allow evil and suffering? Why does he let these things go on? James is very clear to warn them that in the middle of their temptation, don't ever turn and put the blame on God. And it may sound odd, but if you're honest about it, he put this in here because we struggle with that at times, don't we? Well, the Bible teaches that God will test us and put us in situations to grow our faith. He never brings things into our lives to destroy our faith or cause us to sin. But rather to look at the outside, and he's pretty blunt here. He says, don't look at other people. Don't look at God, but he says, where are you supposed to look when you're tempted? Well, he tells us in verse 14, he says, and here's kind of a blunt thing. This is wisdom literature. He says, but each person is tempted when he or she is lured away and enticed by his own desires. Then desires, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. James explains that the true beginning of sin is our own heart. He says, don't look anywhere else. And it's interesting because he uses this word temptation. He says, you're drawn away or lured. Now, many of you may identify with that because this is actually a fishing term in your Bible. It is. It's a fishing term. But think about that. How often have you, those of you who fish, have seen a fish swimming along, and what are you trying to do with that lure? You're just trying to catch its attention, aren't you? Have you ever seen a fish going like this one way and its intent to go this way to catch that lure? What does it do? Lure goes over, what does that lure, what does the fish do? Well, it shoots over and it bites it, doesn't it? Only to find in the middle of that thing there's this hook that grabs it. And he says, look unto yourself, he says here, he says, let no one say he is tempted. I'm being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted. He says, but each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desires. Again, this lure, this fish is swimming in a straight line, gets distracted for the lure, goes only to find a hook in the middle of that. But the way he states it, and there's other things going on here, but the way he states this, he moves all the way, he gets totally away from saying you can't blame anybody else. Now, does it mean that there's other people doing wrong things? Sure, they're doing those things. But he says with temptation, he says, where do you look? He says, look to yourself. He says, your own desires on there. Modern terms, if we were to put this into modern English in our day in America, we could put it this way. In modern terms, he's saying, don't blame your parents. Don't blame the environment. Don't blame peer pressure. But look at your own heart. He puts a temptation for sin coming out of our own desires, not anything else. Now, it's blunt, isn't he? But if we're honest about it, we don't accidentally fall into sin, do we? He says you're drawn away, you're lured away by your own desires. Daniel doesn't force me to be angry. He can do some stuff on there, but what is he going to do? At the most, reveal what's already in there. I can choose to go down this road, or I can choose to go down that road. I make a choice in there. There's a temptation. How am I going to walk through this? What am I going to do? He says your own desires lead you in that direction. He says don't blame anybody else. Look at your own desires. And he puts temptation for sin coming out of our own desires, not anyone else. But it's interesting here because he doesn't say that being tempted is a sin. We are all tempted. And that's an important point here. He says, your temptation, he says it comes from your own desires, but the temptation is not the sin in itself, is it? He never says that being tempted is a sin. Jesus was tempted, wasn't he? Yet we know our scripture says he was tempted at all points, yet without sin. Being tempted is not meaning that you're in sin. It means that you have an opportunity to make that choice, but every one of us will be tempted. You can't walk out the rest of this day without being tempted in all kinds of different ways. And sometimes it's different from some person to another person, but the temptation is never the sin. It's the desire. What do you do in your heart with the temptation? I'm tempted. So when we all of a sudden realize the thing, I'm tempted to get worried about it. I've got to provide for my kids. I've got to provide for my wife. I've got to wonder, what do I do with this whole thing that just got just overwhelmed? All of a sudden your job's gone and you're in another country. I was tempted to say, God, why in the world did you bring us here? I remember as my wife and I started praying and said, God's going to take care of us. But I can tell you I was tempted every hour. Every minute it seemed like at the beginning. God, how am I going to walk through this? What am I going to do? How are you going to take care of me? The temptations are there. They're coming, they're coming, they're coming, they're coming. But that's not a sin to be tempted. It's what I do with the temptation. And ultimately it was turning, God, you are going to have to carry us through this. God, you're going to have to give me the peace. God, you're going to have to give me the strength to walk with my family through this. God, you're going to have to give me the wisdom. How do we build this all back in a month and make sure everybody gets their paycheck? And God was so creative. I can tell you that you can build an entire website It'll do hundreds of thousands of dollars of sales. It'll work internationally in all kinds of currencies with all the products on there, and you can get it for a cheeseburger meal at Dairy Queen. You know how I know that? God brought someone in our life that built the whole thing, and you know what he asked for payment? A cheeseburger meal at Dairy Queen. Military encryption coding on it for the person who developed the whole system for the United States banking system. Did it for free. You're going to be tempted when the trials hit. That doesn't mean you're sinning if you're being tempted. It means you're human. But what do you do when the temptation comes? He says, the temptation is like a fishing lure. You can either strike at it and go in there and you'll find that in that lure there's a hook that got you, or you can keep going the direction you intended to go. And so with that, he says there's, again, and he describes it this way, he says, and hopefully as we go through in our relationship with God, as we keep growing and we keep going, there's less temptation in different things, and we find that strength and trust in God. That's why it's this wisdom issue. The more you walk with God, the more you trust God, the more you know about God, the more he works in your life, the easier it is to keep walking. It doesn't mean the temptation never comes, but it means you realize, oh no, that's one of those lures. I'm not biting that one again. That one hurt. And you realize the longer you walk with God, the more when the temptation comes, you see the less of the temptation at times, but you realize your desires change to be like his. Well, there's a progression in verse 15 that's important. In verse 15 he says, the desire when it is conceived brings birth to sin, and sin when it is fully grown brings forth death. It says the desire of our own hearts, if you act upon those things, if they're not honoring God, they will bring forth sin, and ultimately sin brings forth death. But he's making a practical point here. He says there's a trend in our day, though, to blame everybody else, isn't there? I'm going to deal with one of those really quickly as I'm looking at our time. But with there, he says look at your own heart. There's a trend in our day. If I can't find it, first we look to blame other people, don't we? Around here, we blame Tim. Can't blame Tim. What do we do? So we can't find someone we're going to blame. Can't blame it on parents. Can't blame it on this. Can't blame it on this. Can't blame it on my boss. I can't blame this. I've got this struggle in me. Then we have a tendency in our day to blame Satan or spiritual warfare. Have you heard that? Well, it's got to be Satan. He's got to be dead. Satan is real. Satan is alive. Satan is active. Satan is seeking to devour people. But you realize Satan is a defeated foe. And as I go through this passage, you realize that Satan never comes up in this passage. I'm not saying he's not real. I'm not saying he's not active. Our scriptures clearly tell us he is. But what does he say here? So often we try to blame others, and if we can't find anybody else to blame, we blame Satan or spiritual warfare. What does James say? Look at your own heart. Look at your own desires first. Don't go blaming everywhere else. Look at your own life. He says, James is making a practical point. If you're giving in to temptation and living in a way that does not honor God, look to your own desires and take responsibility. In fact, he comes back and warns them. In verse 16, he says, don't be deceived. I think we're in a world in our day where Christians are trying to deceive themselves to blame everybody else for it. And James says, no, look at your own life. Don't blame this, don't blame that, don't blame everywhere. Look at your own life. Don't be deceived in this. Why? Why does James care about that? I say, don't be deceived because you'll never get over that. You'll never have success over that temptation. You'll always be caught in a trap if you're looking everywhere else but your own life. And he wants the people to be set free. So he says, don't be deceived from that. He says, look to your own life. But then he gives this wonderful, wonderful transition in the passage. He says, don't be deceived, my brothers. But he says, every good gift and every perfect gift is from where? From above. Coming down from the Father of lights, whom there's no variation or shadow due to change. Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth that we should be kind of a first fruits of his creation. Well, what is James talking about? He says, you will be caught up in various trials. In those trials, you will be tempted to walk away from God or question God or struggle in there. He says, guard your own heart in there, but realize you're not on this earth alone. You're not taking this by yourself. We need to realize and take responsibility, but we also realize God loves us. He knows you're going through this. And he walks with us and he helps us to live in a way that honors him. He says, do not be deceived. He says, every good gift is from God above. God doesn't tempt us, but rather instead, in the middle of the temptation, what does he do? He brings his good and perfect gifts to your life. He says, every good and perfect gift comes from above. So in the middle of that, when you're facing it, James is blunt. He says, look to your own life. Make sure you're dealing with who you are and your own desires, but recognize you're not on this life on your own. You have a God who loves you, a Heavenly Father who loves you, and he brings good and perfect gifts right down the middle of your life. Everything you need to walk through that temptation has been given by God. He describes as good and perfect gifts. You can't get better than that, can you? Today, if you are struggling, he says, take an honest look at yourself. But recognize you're not on your own. God comes right down the middle of your life and says, I give you every good and perfect gift you need to walk with me in the middle of that temptation. You're not, if you're just simply being tempted, you've not been caught up into it. Watch your desires. Turn your desires over to him. Let him bring those good and perfect gifts so you can walk through successfully through that trial and that temptation. He describes everything. He says, good and perfect. Everything you need for the temptation, you just simply have to trust him and receive. Well, then he describes and says he's described as the Father of lights with no variation. Now, what in the world does that mean? How does that help me this week as I'm walking through trials that come around me and temptations that possibly could lead me astray, like those fishing lures on there? What difference does it make that he's described as the Father of lights? Let me read that to you again. He says, every good gift and perfect gift comes from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. What in the world is James talking about? And how does that help us today? Most would say he's a reference to his creation. Father of the lights, they're looking up at the skies. He says, there's no shadow in there, there's no change. He says, every good and perfect gift comes from him. Think about that this week. Think about your Genesis 1 account. And the Father and I spoke this universe into creation. He simply molded and fashioned and spoke. He says that same God that created you, created humanity, the Father of lights, the Father of all creation, he doesn't change. He's completely consistent. If you have a background in science, what do we know? We look at these laws that go through. We have a God that built an order and wonderful and beautiful universe, didn't he? He simply spoke it into existence. And it's beautiful. And I can look at it, different rules and laws of our universe and know there's consistency all the way through it. He says the same God who spoke creation into existence, who does not change, there's no shadow into that, he brings good and perfect gifts to you. How much help is available to us this week when we face temptation? The Father of lights, absolutely consistent. What do we know? We look at him in Genesis chapter 1 where he creates, in Genesis chapter 2 where he describes how he creates humanity in there. And then we look at this mess that happens. And what does he do? When there's this mess in Genesis 3, he says, I got a plan. He starts in Genesis chapter 12 and he calls a guy named Abram, and then he makes a covenant with him in Genesis 15. And then you see him in Exodus 19, he makes a covenant with his people. And you see him walk through this wonderful relationship with a person named Ruth. And then he goes through this man named Samuel and how he walks with him. And then David. And you look at all the way through. He goes, I got this plan all the way go to Jesus Christ in the New Testament. And he keeps going all the way to our day. How consistent is our God? You see a pattern of love all the way through, don't you? You see a pattern of caring for his people all the way through. You see a pattern of concern and detail. We notice the smallest little detail we see of Psalms 139 says, every one of your days was numbered. He knows them. We know from the scriptures every hair in your head is counted. How consistent is our Lord? It says, if you're facing temptation, look to your insides, to your own desires. Own it. Recognize in there. And what do? You turn it over to the Heavenly Father who gives good and perfect gifts. The Father of light who's completely consistent to walk with you. God does not tempt. but instead his desire is to bring good gifts to our lives, given to us through Jesus Christ. It was an interesting chapter. We'll take our time as we walk through James, but today, it's a really practical book. Today, if you're walking through and you've had various trials fall upon you, remember last week, as we said, Luke chapter 10, it used that same word when a man was taking his trip from Jerusalem to Jericho and robbers fell upon him. If the trials have fallen upon you, and many of you, I know they have, we walk together in this world and it's a mess at times, isn't it? James says, watch out in the middle of those trials because you're going to get tempted. You're going to question stuff. Does God love me? Is this fair? Why am I going through this? Who did this? Why should I have to go through this? I feel like I'm falling apart. I feel like things are crushing me down. I feel like all this stuff going on. You will have temptations come to you in the middle of the trials. That's normal. That's called being human. But he says, in the middle of those trials, be careful to watch your own heart. Instead of letting those temptations draw you away, what should we do? Go to our perfect Heavenly Father of lights, who from the very beginning created you, and he said, it is good. And when the mess happens in Genesis 3, he spent all the way through the scriptures trying to redeem you and walk with you. He sent his own son to die on the cross, to pay the debt for your sins so that you can walk with him. In the middle of that, he desires to bring good and perfect gifts right down the middle of your life so you will successfully walk through those temptations. I think when James is writing this, he's watching them struggle and he's thinking, oh, but you don't know how amazing your Heavenly Father is, how he loves to walk with you. So I would ask you today, if you're being tempted, start by looking inward and ask yourself, what is going on with my desires? Is that a fair place to start? James thinks so. Let's look on the inside. But after you've looked on the inside, I challenge you to look on the outside towards your Heavenly Father and say, Heavenly Father, could you bring those good and perfect gifts right in the middle of my life? I don't want to succumb to these things. I don't want to go down that road. I want you to help me. And when you come and you ask your Heavenly Father for that, what's he going to tell you? He'll say, you not imagine the good and perfect gifts I've been waiting to give you. I know what you're walking through. I know what you're facing. Let me bring those right down the middle of your life. Oh, no, that's okay. That's a reminder we need to end. So look inward and look at your own hearts, but look outward and look for God to show you how he plans to bring his good and perfect gifts right down the middle of your life to bless you. So that he can look at the end and say, you hit the trial, you hit the temptation, you walk faithfully, you're blessed. You may be tired, you may be worn out, but you're blessed because you know you walk with God and he brought good and perfect gifts into your life. And then you bear witness about how amazing our God is. We're going to have a time of invitation, and Tim's going to lead us. But if you are struggling, if you're getting beat up by trials, and your temptations are coming, and you just need to come forward and just pray and spend some time with our Heavenly Father, and say, I need those good and perfect gifts. You got to help me through this. Then I encourage you to come and do that. If you just need someone to talk to and pray with you, we'll be happy to pray with you. But James is practical. He knows we all face this during the week. And he gives us a wonderful solution to walk with our Heavenly Father. My prayer for us is that we would be blessed. Let me have a word of prayer with you, then Tim will lead us. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you never change and that from the beginning you've loved us. Lord, I pray for each of us here today. Lord, I don't know. I know a lot of us are going through some tough things. Lord, I pray that as we walk through those trials together as a church family, as individuals, as Sunday school classes, or as Bible study groups, or as we walk through these things, I pray that we would have an honest look at our own lives. But Lord, not for negative things, but to look and see how can we turn and walk with you. Lord, I pray you give us desires to seek after you. And Lord, I pray that you bring those good and perfect gifts right in the middle of all that we're facing, right in the perfect timing. And we be faithful to thank you and praise you. Lord, I pray these things in your name.